Welcome to Just Now Possible with Teresa Torres.
So I'm Lawrence. I am one of the founding engineers at Incident. So I've been here for about 4 and a bit years, since it was just myself and Pete, Stephen and Chris, the 3 founders. I lead up the AI team Incident, where I work with Ed, trying to build out our AI SRE product.
And I'm Ed. I'm the product lead working on AI here at Incident, working alongside Lawrence. I've been at the company just about 3.5 years, a little less time than Lawrence. And during that time, I was working initially in a kind of data role at the company and then moved into product, where I worked on our core product here, which is called Response, which is like an incident management coordination product, and then moved over to AI about 1.5 years ago.
Okay, great. Tell me at a high level, like, what does Incident do?
So Incident.io, we started just over 4 years ago. The first product we launched was called Response, which was really to help people communicate and coordinate when things go wrong. So we work with companies, small and large. So we have customers like Lovable all the way up to Netflix, and we help them get the right people in the room, help them know what to do, have a consistent process, hopefully make that situation a little bit less stressful and save them some time in doing it. And then about 2 years into our journey, we launched our on-call product as well, which helps get the right people in the room to begin with, so you can manage your schedules, escalation paths, things like that. So we help you get the right people in the room in the first place. But around 1.5 years ago, we started working on a new product, which is called AI SRE. So unlike our old products, which really help you coordinate, communicate, help you stitch together everything that you're already doing as a human team responding to that incident. With AI, we can start to try and do some of that work directly on your behalf. So actually, our initial use cases were things like taking notes during calls so you don't have to, or summarizing text and helping you communicate to different stakeholders. And now we're working on more ambitious use cases, which we call AI SRE, which is actually looking at dozens of different sources of information to try and piece together what's actually going on and help you investigate the incident. And really the ambition there is if we can help you figure out what's going on faster, we can help you resolve it faster too.
And tell me, what does SRE stand for?
Well, yeah, I can do that because I used to be one. So SRE stands for Site Reliability Engineer. So they're engineers who have a lean towards working on infrastructure and distributed systems, often involved in more of the type of like heavy duty incident response that you might find at a tech company. The term was pioneered by Google. So they have a book on it called SRE, like engineering, which is where they coined it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And people who
Okay.
were very busy last week dealing with AWS.
Yeah, what I love is that you reached out to me during the AWS outage, which is amazing, very appropriate for what your company does. So it sounds like historically, the company is focused on like that moment where the site's down, something's wrong. You're trying to bring, you have an on-call product that brings the right people together. And then there was some tooling around how do we help people in that moment. And then this latest product, you're starting to move into how do we actually have the AI help with the work that an SRE would do? So moving more into maybe the transition from supporting to doing. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. So I think we've always focused on giving people tools to help them operate and run the incident. And the cool thing about AI and all the new technology that's come out is that we can be a lot more ambitious than that. So the difference here is before maybe we had tools that would help you write your updates and run the incident operationally. This AI SRE product is actually trawling through your logs and it's connecting to your systems and it's going through all of your infrastructure to try and go, what actually is this problem? What may have caused this problem if it's an upstream dependency? And eventually coming back to you with, hey, here is the problem. And actually, I think I can do a thing to try and fix it for you. I don't know, draft a code change and try and fix your code, or maybe reboot a server and something like that.
Okay, now this may be a hard question to answer because there may be no answer to it, but let's use last week as an example. You work at a company, you wake up, your site's down. Tell me we can talk through both kind of your traditional products, what happens, and then what's happening with this new AI SRE.
Normally, if like in a world without our product, last week during that AWS outage, you may have been paged. So your phone might ring and you'd have a thing that goes, hey, you've been paged, by the way. And not much else. really. And you're just left to then go log into all of your devices and try and sign into all of your services. At that point, you go, well, what even is this issue? And you might load up like the code to look at what the alert is, and the alert will go, it's about this piece of infrastructure over there. So maybe you then open up your Grafana dashboard or your Datadog dashboard and try and figure out, oh, like, why is Postgres struggling? What's actually going on here? And at this point, you've probably actually forgotten to inform anyone else about the fact that you're doing it. So maybe other people are getting paged and they have no idea what's happening. And the whole of your company is currently panicking because, you know, people were just doing a marketing review of the website and now they've realized the website's down and they're trying to report it in on, I don't know, some Google Hangout that the company have an emergency. Everything is scattered and really hard to piece together and often very high stress until eventually, obviously, your executives get involved, and that doesn't really make anything better either. So in the world that we are trying and I think succeeding in creating, what happens is we end up making your phone ring, but we are only going to make your phone ring once because we're going to intelligently look at everything that's going on, make sure that we've gone, oh, there's a lot of things happening, but I'm going to collate this together and here's just one report. You'll then say, hey, I'm on this, and it will drop you directly into a Slack channel or a Teams channel where all of the information about the incident is presented to you with links out to all of the different systems that you might use. It's at this point, the new product that we're building, AI SRE, is going to kick in. And behind the scenes, what we're doing from the moment that we've heard about this alert is we've started passing it into this multi-agent system that we've been building. And we're going to start searching through thousands of your GitHub pull requests. We're going to look at any of the Slack messages in your workspace that you may have connected into the system. We're going to look at incidents that look like this one that you've had historically on the platform. And we're going to combine all this together to come up with a sense of what we actually think is going on. And then we're going to spin off various different agents that all in parallel work their way through all of your logs, metrics, traces. It's going to build up an idea of what it thinks is actually happening in much the same way as a human might, and eventually come back to you with, hey, this is my hypothesis of what's happening. This is what I think you should do about it. But it should hopefully do that in about 1 or 2 minutes, where a human at this point has probably actually just woken up and is blurrily like trying to make a coffee, maybe even looking for their laptop, like, where did I leave it last night? So yeah, that's the world that we're trying to get to, where we're going to do a ton of this very stressful, high pressure work on behalf of an incident responder and give you all of the links immediately so that you can figure out exactly what's going on and in some case fix it for you before you've even actually had to get out of bed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I imagine, and the reason why I said maybe there's not an answer to this is with the AWS outage in particular, there's all these companies that have this dependency, and I'm guessing there's nothing you can do other than start to put your processes in place to notify customers and whatnot. Is that true or no?
So for sure, but I think AWS is actually a really good example of this, honestly, because the first thing that you do is you wake up and you panic and you go, is it actually us? And our system can go, no, it's not just you. Actually, we're seeing this across a whole thing. There's a status page actually over here, and lots of people are reporting AWS is down. So now immediately you know that AWS is down. And we're not just going to stop there either. We'll go, actually, you should probably post an update to your status page. And I've gone and drafted it for you using some of the templates that you've used in the past. So actually, it really is helping even in the situation where your ability to remediate the incident is a bit outside of your direct control.
Yeah, so I mentioned at the start, I don't know a ton about this space, but I am thinking about that. I worked at a company in the Bay Area where we had downtime and we were trying to figure out why. And it was super stressful, right? Like engineers we were a small company, 20 people. I think we had 6 engineers and all hands on deck. We literally, somebody had, this is going to date me a little bit, but somebody had to physically go to the data center before everything was in the cloud, right? And it turned out like a major internet cable in the Bay Area had been cut.
Yeah.
And do you remember this, Dave? Yeah, okay.
It happens more often than you might think.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. I thought it was like that day it happened.
No,
okay, good.
No, submarine cables, they get cut more often than you might expect.
Yeah, I do remember it was so stressful and we had no internet. Nobody had any internet. Like we had cell phone coverage, but like you can't really work off your cell phone coverage. And I think we had 500 customers and literally 20 people in the company just got on the phone all day long. And all we did that day was we notified our customers. They're like, hey, this cable's being repaired and we'll be back up when the internet's back up. And so like, I love this idea of there was this probably 1 to 2 to 3 hours where we didn't know what the problem was. And it was a scramble. And so it sounds like a lot of what your system is designed to do is let's compress that time period. Our agents can go off and figure out what's wrong so that you immediately know, okay, how are we going to act on this? How do we respond to it? Can we fix it? Are we dependent on a third party?
But I also think, thinking back to exactly that incident where you've got your 500 customers and they're all calling in, I think there is a huge difference in how your customers will behave if you proactively reach out to them to go, hey,
Yeah.
there is an issue. We've got it under control. Come here for updates, and we're going to send them regularly. And that's what our system helps you do. And it turns it from an incident where everyone's calling you and hammering the phone lines with no coordination to actually cool, they're on this. And that's really important.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, I'm glad. I forgot about that day, but now it really is making what you work on very salient. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so it sounds like you have, like, your company has a history with sort of incident response. I know everybody in the last couple of years has been like, okay, new technology, what can we do with this? Tell me a little bit about, how did you decide this AI SRE was even feasible? Tell me about the very beginning inklings of how did you decide this was worth pursuing?
Yeah, I mean, for us, AI is essentially the only way that you can solve this problem. There are so many different sources of information that you need to consider when you're figuring out what's going on. Lawrence just touched on that, but maybe you're going into Confluence to look at some runbook. You might have your alerting in a different tool. You have maybe a couple of different observability tools you're scanning between, dealing with 2FA. Maybe you're looking at deployment somewhere else, or you're digging around some Slack channel, you think you remember something. So there's so many different sources of information. And for us, one of the exciting things about AI was it was the first thing we had an inkling it might be possible that can actually look across all of those different sources and start to try and figure out what's relevant and piece together the relevant sources of information. Not that it's been easy to do, and we've certainly learned that the hard way, but it was just, a first glimmer that it might now be possible. And then after that, you fall into the trap where you try something and you get to a prototype really quickly. I think we had a prototype going in. Lawrence, you'll remember better than I will, but within a couple of days, and then that's when the real work starts, to actually work around all of the different cases your product will support, and even just understanding how the product's performing in all of those different cases becomes this huge effort.
Yeah. Okay. So you've already hit on two things. One is sort of customer problems that actually just now become possible to address because of AI, hence the name of the podcast. And then also this second theme of prototyping AI products, especially LLM-based AI products, fun and looks easy. And then getting it to be reliably good is really the hard part. Tell me a little bit about that initial prototype. And especially, it sounds like your use case, you could have had a really big footprint of what it could do. So I'm also curious about, like, what did that first prototype do? Where did you start?
Yeah. We were experimenting with how we can weave AI into the product for a fair amount of time before we started looking in earnest at this AI SRE concept. So I think Ed was the PM of the team who was working at the time on incident updates and summaries, so making sure that we help you communicate during an incident. So we already had some kind of building blocks of AI in our system. But I think it was around the time where GPT-4o came out, and suddenly these models have got much more interesting. And we started thinking about, well, realistically, what could we do with the tech that's out today? So the prototype that I ended up building at the time was just a very basic, just sit there and listen for when an incident starts and pull down all of the information that we can possibly get at from the alert that's associated with the incident. And then run some analysis through that, look at the previous code changes and any recently merged changes to your code base, and try and figure out from those changes using these frontier models whether or not you think that they look like they may have caused the problem, so that you can end up sending a message to someone in the channel that goes, hey, I know there's an issue, but it really looks like this is probably the thing, and you might want to revert it. And that was mostly an orchestration layer. Honestly, it was trying to build this system that would listen to events and then run in real time a bunch of these prompts and then summarize everything and print the message back out with a nice little progress meter in the channel so that people knew what was going on. So very basic, and it's since expanded into something much, much more complex.
It sounds like even that simple prototype, even if it was just like a series of prompts, it sounds like there was a lot of retrieval steps because you had to go look up data to see what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So the truth is, you can't, if you think about a standard code change, like some of these code changes may be huge, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lines of code, especially back in days of GPT-4o with, 25,000 token context windows or something like that. That just does not fit. So you're already faced with this challenge of context window management and how you're going to quickly go through all of the resources that you have in both a time-effective and a cost-effective manner to try and find results that are reasonably useful to the person that you're trying to help in the incident. So we built a bunch of stuff around that. We've experimented with vectorization of the code changes, so putting them into an embedding model, and then we use Postgres, so using PG vector to try and pull out things that are similar. We've experimented with like text similarity and things like that. Landed on a combination of, honestly, text similarity, LLM summarization, and vector embeddings, with a bit of a complexity around how we do that RAG pipeline. But yeah, at the time we tried a couple of these methods and were both like optimistic about the times where they went really well, and also very frustrated at how limited a lot of the results could be. So walking like headfirst into all the issues, which were far worse a couple of years ago, around like chunking and embedding and getting good quality back from these vector similarity searches.
It's wild how fast things have evolved. Even just thinking about something like chunking, like context windows have grown so much. I know even with bigger context windows, like there's still context rot, and like the more we can manage that context, the better. But I feel like it wasn't very long ago we had 2000K context windows. Like it's wild.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was at a talk last night, and someone was asking me, how do you avoid getting overwhelmed by all this stuff that's coming out in AI research? Like, I'm working on AI, like how do I stop myself from feeling like I'm just being snowed under? And I think the key for me is it's the same as a lot of tech that we've had over the last couple of decades, in that you need to be very anti-fad or like hype.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a lot of stuff around AI, especially, such as I think like fine tuning is one of them, and vectorization is another, where people went really hard on these new techniques, and then I think they bottomed out pretty quick with the technology that they had at the time, and started realizing that a lot of the conventional technology mixed maybe with a frontier model can perform a lot more reliably and it's a lot simpler and can give you more accurate results. So I think there's been a lot of experimentation, but yeah, there's lots of fads in AI, and it's hard to know which ones to choose to invest in.
It's interesting too that you started with a mix, like your retrieval strategy. First of all, let me ask a clarifying question. It sounds like a lot of your retrieval is recent code releases, and this makes sense to me because I imagine a lot of incidents are created by a bad release. And so you're looking at what could have caused this problem.
Yeah, so we have a combination. So code changes is one of them. So you can imagine that we pull in a code change and we have all of the code associated with that change, and we want to index it so that we can find it very quickly. But then we also have other things that are a bit more complicated and custom. Like we index incidents. We want to do RAG over incidents. But when you're searching for incidents that are relevant to the current incident, it's not the case that you're just searching for something that looks similar. What you need to do is you need to take your current incident and pre-process it along a bunch of dimensions. So what type of alert is this? What systems does it impact? What symptoms are we seeing? And then you end up having to do similarity searches against all those different dimensions, mix all of those together, and then be re-ranking based on the aggregate results that you get out of the pipeline at the end. So it's often with AI, I think it comes down to how good are you asking questions. And for RAG pipelines, it's always like, how can you generate the right questions for the searches that you want to issue? And that's been a big challenge for us.
It's the second piece that really jumped out at me, because this is also becoming a theme, is that for retrieval steps, it's rare that you're relying on one retrieval method. And
yes,
that the type of what you need to retrieve is a big impact on what type of retrieval step to have. So for example, in a recent episode, a company talked about how they would crawl websites and collect e-commerce data. And so they had a lot of really unstructured data, but they also had structured product feeds. And what they found was like keyword search was better in one instance and semantic search was better in another instance. And they had to experiment a ton. And of course, everybody with this FOMO you're talking about, like wants to start with embeddings. And embeddings are great for specific things, but they're not great for everything. So tell me a little bit about just iterations you went through to get your retrieval steps right, and how you worked through that.
Yeah, at first we just went with embeddings, like you say, right? I think this was, at the time, everyone's, oh, well, you can semantically embed a document or a piece of information, and then you have a vector, and kind of makes sense, cosine similarity, you'll get something back, it's cool. But we quickly realized that there's a bunch of issues with that. Firstly, you still need to pre-process your data so that you can store the vectors that you do the similarity search against. So you have to think about versioning of that like vector. So if you have a type of format that you're producing your document into that you're using to generate the vector, then you need to think about what that format is and version the vectors so that you understand them. There's also, when a vector is stored in the database, it's totally inscrutable. Like you just have numbers and it's really difficult for you to debug it when you get a thing back, like what even is this thing? But more relevant to us was we found that when we were getting the vectorized result or the similar results back, the vector similarity would trigger on things that didn't seem relevant or were like very fuzzy on what people were actually looking for. So you needed this additional layer on top of whatever you were getting back from the vectorization that could end up being a bit more dissertive, so like actually trying to find the stuff that you were really looking for. So we ended up building this concept of, at the time, I think we didn't really know what it was called. Nowadays, it would be called re-ranking. We were calling it shortlisting at the time. But what we would do is we would build up these long lists of results that looked like they matched on the vector similarity. And then we'd unpack all of those resources and we'd dump them into prompts where we'd use frontier models to then re-rank them and go, give me the top 3 of this batch of 25. And then we collate them into a final batch where we'd re-rank them again. And then we take the top 5 or something like that. So we have this abstraction that's doing this across all of the different search results that we give. So incidents, GitHub code changes, all sorts. And that was working pretty well. And I think this is what our stuff has evolved into today. But what we have actually done is we walked back a lot of the vectorization. So because the vectors were so hard to debug, and you have all these like issues around like how do you even know if the thing is right, and then chunking and all of that stuff goes into it. What we've actually found is much better is we typically either generate free-form text summaries or we tag documents. So we end up taking a frontier model, which nowadays have larger context windows, like you were saying before, and then we have prompts that can extract either a summarization or a list of tagged keywords from those documents. We then store them in Postgres, and we're using standard conventional database indexing. So we end up building our long list from looking at text similarity between either the tags or the summarization, rather than using vectors. And then we're passing them back through the same re-ranking infrastructure that we've built before, where we use frontier models to try and distinguish what is the top results. But this time, hopefully the results that we're putting into the top of the funnel are deterministic, which is one. And when you don't find something, your question is not like, why did that vector not match compared to every other vector, and pulling up like a graph of like cosine similarity. You're just looking at the tags and you're going, why did this document not have the tag that I was looking for? What happened there? So it's a lot simpler and it works a lot better for us. And that's what we're going with nowadays.
It seems like a skill that's emerging, which sounds so simple, but I think is deceptively hard, is when designing a system like this is really understanding what's the deterministic steps, like where can we use more traditional technology versus where does the LLM excel? And it sounds like that's the case here, where you have more traditional kind of database metadata, but it's still grabbing maybe too much. And so then using an LLM to filter and do that semantic analysis, that combination becomes really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it's as much how you get humans to understand the system and debug it when it goes wrong as it is to build a system that is good, because the two things are just so closely coupled together. So for us now, when we're looking through and trying to debug this stuff and we're looking at resources in our system, it's just so much clearer to us. You've just got simple keyword tagging and that makes so much more sense to people. So yeah, I think it has parallels to being an SRE actually. And I compare AI engineering a lot to working with distributed systems and infrastructure. Lots of people might race to be like, oh, we need this super cool new technology, highly scalable database. And often, I think in my experience, I found that the simpler technology and the simpler approach is honestly just a lot less pain in the long term and can often perform better than you might have otherwise expected.
So I have a question about this. So an incident happens and you're pulling data. It sounds like you're looking at recent code releases. It also sounds like for your customers, you're keeping an incident history. I'm assuming that's helpful because if you can find something that looks like what's happening right now, it helps you diagnose the problem.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
One thing I think that's interesting about that, though, is that the core assumption in search is that we're looking for something and that something exists. Whereas I imagine you could have a unique incident and you're not finding anything in your incident database. And those are like the challenges where if an LLM is involved, the danger is a hallucination. You're going to tell me about an incident that's not real. So I'm curious about what you're doing there.
So we don't tend to get hallucinations of stuff that doesn't exist. I think the biggest area of like hallucinations for us, and honestly, this is debatable whether or not we're still seeing them like this long URLs and things like that. You might get something being malformed, spat out the other end of the LLM. but we typically don't get stuff that doesn't exist. I think in the earlier models we used to. So I actually remember in the search infrastructure we had a check in the code that would filter out anything that we couldn't actually cross-reference at the end of it. And there used to be that stuff would fire. That no longer fires. Like the new frontier, like the frontier models nowadays are good enough that they very rarely do this stuff. So we deal less with that. It's actually more the positivity bias of LLMs that gets us. And I think whenever we're onboarding people into the team, it's one of the most common aha moments that I see when they're tuning prompts is when they look at a prompt and they're like, why on earth did it do that? It's just giving me total garbage. It should have given me nothing. And you go, well, at the top of your system prompt is, give me between 3 and 5 points about this thing. You're like, the LLM is sat there with a gun to his head being like, I have to give you something. I don't have an option here. And that's when you end up with it really bending itself out of shape.
Yeah, so I guess in that case, it's not really hallucinations. It's your relevancy is tanking because it looks like it has to give you something.
Yeah.
I think one interesting parallel today, you're both mentioning how embeddings have been so popular and a sort of hammer people have tried to apply to every nail. I think one thing that's happening right now to a similar extent is concepts of like memory, which really people are just using a text file and taking some notes down as their product goes. But I think for us, this ability to retrieve past incidents is a really effective form, essentially, of memory, because we're able to use this context to then on the fly generate what we'd call like a ephemeral runbook, which basically says, here's how you might go about resolving the incident. It's like it's a vague memory of what's happened before.
It's cool. It's a little bit like you're replicating a human's SRE experience, right? I've seen something like this before, and so I'm going to go look at these things first.
Yeah, I think the parallel I've drawn before is I think your incident response process, how you run incidents in your company, is kind of like your company's immune system in a weird way. It's like when bad stuff happens, like you have this organizational collective response to it. And just an immune system, if you can become a lot better across the whole system at recognizing patterns and responding to them much more promptly, you can get a lot better at actually dealing with the problem and dealing with it proactively. And I think if you consider how much data goes into our platform about how people respond across the organization, and then you're using AI to pull all of that in so that you can more accurately respond with much more context than any one individual would have, then your immune system becomes a lot more effective.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, a really interesting source of intuition, just thinking about how a human might approach the problem. Because often if you're asking an LLM to do something and it just won't, you're probably actually asking it to do an unreasonably hard thing. And if you were talking to a human, you'd actually be breaking the problem down a lot more, or maybe giving it different pieces of context. So for us, when we're building the system, we often think about that. How might a human actually break down this problem into kind of bite-sized chunks?
I actually think this is like a lot of people talk about this as your LLM is like your intern that needs training. And I think this is such a great analogy because like we expect, it's amazing how fast we went from this is a toy to now we ask it to do everything for us, and then we're disappointed when it doesn't do everything we asked for. And I also think this framing of treat it like it's a person, I think is starting to unlock some really interesting use cases. Like I talked to one of our past episodes was with this company, Neeple, and they basically make digital coworkers. And they're doing exactly what like a lot of companies are doing, where like they got to a point where they needed a workflow builder, but their customers are not technical. So they didn't want to build the Zapier, Make, and 8N workflow. And they're like, how would you teach a human? You would just tell them the process. And they actually ended up building an interface where it's a chat interface where they tell the LLM what they want it to do. And it talks back about where it's confused, and they get all the logic of a workflow tool without thinking about the logic of a workflow tool. So I think this framing of it really is just a teammate helps in the design of the product itself.
Yeah, I've also seen some pretty funny results where LLMs actually perform better if you say please and thank you and you ask nicely. And they need some encouragement.
I think thinking about what you were just saying there as well, one thing that I'm really excited about us looking into at one point is I really like the idea of incident postmortems or debriefs. I love the idea of actually having an agent that reaches out to people who were involved in the incident and actually runs a debrief with them. And like I don't know how I feel about the voice agents and stuff like that, but I like the idea of scheduling a meeting to do a debrief, and you sit there and you're like, oh, actually, when I was doing this, I felt like it went sideways like this, and then end up collating all the information. I think that's a really effective way of getting information from people in advance of an instant debrief. But it's interesting to me how easy it is now, or not easy, but like straightforward it is to take an AI and start using that to perform that otherwise very time intensive process.
I think what can be really powerful about that is that agent has the context of what actually happened. That interview becomes really reliable because the agent can be like, oh, Lawrence, you did this step at this moment. What were you thinking there? And actually start to pull out a more reliable debrief.
Yeah, and I think I always think about like postmortems. I used to think about, because I used to run the infrastructure stuff at a much larger company before, and we dealt with a lot of postmortems. And one of the things that I would see lots of people doing, especially if they had less experience, is like there's this blank page problem. And I think that's where, if you're asking someone to do something like that, if they've not done something before, just getting themselves from loading up like a new Notion doc or something and actually writing out the structure is really hard to do. But once you've done it, you can flow into it. I think AI has the opportunity to break through that blank page problem in a lot of different ways where you can find analogies for it.
Yeah, that really resonates even just with my personal experience of working with AI. I feel like I'm actually exhausted at the end of the day because I never have the blank page problem. Like I just have momentum all day. And then it's like dinner.
Terrible.
It's at dinner time and I'm like, oh, I did too much today. That's my own personal problem though. Okay, here's something I'm interested in. It seems like your SRE could have a really large footprint. Like in an ideal world, an incident happens and it goes off and it pulls everything that could be related to it. I think one of the things that teams struggle with is I can see this big footprint. How do I turn it into a smaller problem that I can actually start to deliver? And I'm curious about the decisions you made around there and like how you even started this.
This is the interesting part because our product anyway, when it goes and reasons through all of this stuff, it is almost not useless, but it's much less valuable if it's reasoning through all of these problems and it just basically shows you at the end, here's a result. Because then people can't see how it came to its conclusions. And it's not right every time. It has incomplete data. It has sometimes incorrect data, depending on even stuff that you've got recorded in your official docs, right? Like we know that can actually be wrong sometimes. So it does make mistakes, and you want to be able to look at the final output and then dig back into it. And in order for you to dig into it as a human, you need to be seeing presented in front of you this data in a format or a structure that makes sense and agrees with the way that you think about incidents and how you think about debugging. So there's a lot here that is not just trying to break down the problem so that AI can work on it effectively, but it's also when you've managed to break it down for the AI to work on it effectively, seeing the structure of how we went about the system internally and trying to bubble that back up through our designs is how we can communicate to a human exactly what we did and lend them confidence that the thing has done the right thing. I think like Ed's thought about quite a lot of this stuff when it came to how we were designing the dashboard for investigations and things like that.
Yeah, our product is super interesting where I think it's helpful to think about the initial context before the product even existed, which is people are generally, we touched on this already, but they're skipping between like maybe a dozen different tools. They're dealing with 2FA, obviously you're in like a super stressful environment. So even before we started working on this AI product, our original response product, a lot of what it did was consolidate as much information as possible and actually bring it into Slack, where then you could coordinate everything from there. We pull in information, but also you could drive the response, do things like go update your status page, do it directly from Slack, escalate to somebody else and bring them in to support you, do it directly from Slack. So it's about removing this need to scan across lots of different sources and just bring in only the context you need and then the tools you need to run things from there. And we've tried to be consistent with the greatest possible extent that we can with AI SRE, which is we'll post into Slack a report with just the key information we think you really need to know. So it's not going to be too overwhelming and distracting. In the thread, we'll start to put some of the reasoning. So if you want to validate some of those steps or look deeper, you can do it there. And then if you really want to dig in, you can click out to an external link. And then we have this much richer view, which shows a full reasoning trace of everything it's been looking into. And you can follow specific steps or go out to the raw citations. So for us, that's been really important, basically just showing only the information that you need in that moment, but then making it really easy to jump out and see more. And then also bringing it into this context where people already are. So we bring the information to you directly in Slack. So you don't need to change too much your existing workflow to benefit from some of the information it's bringing in. So those are some of the ways we've been thinking about it. And then it also goes to some of the ways we develop the product too, which is we will always favor signal over noise because we don't want to distract you at all if we don't need to. So we only want to show you things that we're confident in. So in terms of how we're kind of evaluating the system as well, that's always our bias as well.
Yeah. This is another theme that's starting to emerge, is especially in these systems where we're presenting data or we're retrieving things, really just building trust with the human in the process of, are we showing you the right things? And I could imagine in your context, showing the wrong thing could be really problematic. Like you're sending people down these red herrings when they need to be uncovering a critical incident.
Yeah, and I think we're adding a bunch of additional data sources and reasoning to the system over the next quarter. But at the top of the list of priorities that we have is making sure that this thing is rock solid and reducing these ideas of false positives. So we're trying to tune ourselves to be extraordinarily allergic to anything that we say that would send anyone down the wrong path. And we're doing that through a mix of automated evaluation and collecting feedback from people, and then just like ruthlessly trying to stamp out anything that might have been misleading.
In terms of, say, false positives, even we try and think about small details like how assertive is the language that we're producing in our reports? Are we saying we're confident about certain parts or less confident? How are we presenting that? And it makes a huge difference to how it's perceived. If someone's, oh, here's a potential avenue that I can go investigate, let me go trace the breadcrumbs, feels very different to a system confidently telling you something, which actually maybe isn't true.
I also even love the UX of this. I can imagine a team like working out of a shared Slack channel where this information is getting pulled in. Whereas maybe previously you had people that were on call that were all at home, maybe duplicating work. And so now you have, it's almost like your Slack channel is your incident dashboard, and you can better see what people are.
That's exactly it. And then one final thought, which is being in that context of Slack, it's naturally chatty, right? Everyone's typing in what they're working on and what they're thinking about. But that's actually so helpful in the context of building an AI tool, because for one, it enables our system to be an ambient agent. It can just be monitoring what's happening in the channel as it's happening. And humans are finding new useful bits of information. Maybe they find something has changed in one of their metrics, and they post that into the channel. Then our system can run with it, and then that can support a subsequent investigation. So that's really helpful. And then also it creates this environment where people are used to chatting back to the system. So it enables a very sort of intuitive natural language interface for the product as well. So we found, being in Slack is really effective.
And are people able to, if the agent posts, here's a report I found, are they able to ask questions of that report?
Yes, exactly.
Very cool.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, I love this. I feel like it's, I love this, like you're keeping the work in the place where the work happens. It's very interactive. It doesn't feel like this side UX that so many AI products end up with. Give me the high level overview of just the way I think about this is like when we had workflows, I can see the workflow map. With agents, it's a little more complex, but there's still a workflow map, right? Yeah. Walk me through, what does this product look like under the hood?
Sure. So we call the thing that the AI SRE product does an investigation. So when an incident is created, we will create an investigation that lives alongside it, and it's like coupled to that incident. The investigation as a system is there's an orchestration layer that can run a bunch of these different jobs. We call them checks, investigation checks. But what happens is when we first sign up, the system will go, hey, do I actually even have enough information to do relevant things here? Because sometimes someone may have created an incident that just goes, it's broken. And you're like, I can try, but like you said earlier with like positivity bias, that won't go well. So we gate the full-on investigation flow up until the point where we're like, cool, we know enough now that we know the nature of the problem. So we're going to start exploring. As soon as that happens, we end up enqueuing a bunch of different checks in parallel. And we call these our like searcher checks. So this is where we're engaging with our RAG pipelines. We're looking at anything that we can find in your GitHub, like code changes or GitLab. We're looking at anything that we can find historically across all of our incidents in the platform. We're also talking to your Slack workspace. So people can go, this channel over here is where people often talk about, I'm about to deploy something, or by the way, I've changed this thing. So they can opt that in, and we'll index those as well so that we can surface them in the incident. But we're also about to start talking with connections to Datadog and Grafana. And that's where we're looking at your connections into logs, metrics, and traces. And we're going, cool, like I've got this alert over here. We're like, cool, what are the upstream dependencies? Where are you going from? All of that stuff. Once these searches are complete, they feed back into what we call an assessment stage. So it's at this point that we end up building kind of a list of what we call findings, which are concrete observations about what we've seen. So we can go, oh, actually, we saw like Lisa was talking in a Slack channel, and she said optimizations like this are bad. Actually, we've done them in the past, so just be very careful with them. And you're like, oh, cool. Probably should have known that. Or we go, we've actually found a pull request here that looks like it might be problematic. And we end up creating those findings and building a preliminary hypothesis about what's going on. But it's at that point that the agent can make another turn through the system. So it gets to a place where it goes, I think I've got some ideas, but then it starts critiquing its understanding. And it goes, cool, like I've said these things, but what am I uncertain about? And what questions that if only I had the answer to those questions, I would be able to discount, rule out, or strengthen my hypothesis. So then we end up fanning out to a bunch of other agents where those agents have just one task. And those agents are told, you have this question to answer. Here is the rest of the context from the investigation. Do whatever you need to do to try and answer it. And this is when they're going out and drilling into metrics, drilling into traces, maybe even searching the web. Like maybe you've asked, does Kubernetes even work like this? And it's looking up the Kubernetes docs, that sort of thing. Eventually, all of these agents will finish. And when they finish, they report their answer back to the main reasoning loop. That then goes back into our list of findings, and the main reasoning loop will then go inform any of the other agents that are continuing in the background about any of the findings that they think those agents may find relevant. So then you end up triggering these things, and you can imagine you've essentially taken this incident and going back to your treating these systems as humans, you essentially have a couple of different humans that are good at different things, right? So you've got one human that is really good at knowing how to run comms. And we're asking the comms person, hey, do you think that we need to update the state page yet, given what you can see? And then we've got another person who's maybe very technical, like an engineer, and they're the person that we're asking technical questions to. And they're just fanning out, and you've got everyone in the room working on their different streams of work and then reporting back to what in our situation would be the incident lead, but actually in this case is the investigation agent and the main reasoning step. Until eventually, over time, you conclude that this is your understanding of what the incident is, and here is everything that you could give to the responder that would help them. And you pause because you go, this is everything that I have for now. And then as Ed says, when people start talking back in the Slack channel, maybe even responding to the message that you got, or maybe we see other things happening in the background, maybe your metrics are changing, we parcel that up and then we bundle that back into the investigation agent. So we pass it back in and now it goes, cool, I've learned some more things. What do I need to do now? What questions do I need to ask? What do I need to go find out? Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm like so fascinated by this. There's two things I want to hone in on. So it seems like there's core elements of a finding, something we learned that is true. Then the agent is generating questions that are maybe open questions that sub-agents go off and explore.
Yeah.
What gets pushed into Slack? Do all findings get pushed into Slack? Do questions get pushed into Slack?
So what happens is those findings are our observations and they're backed by evidence. But then what we do is there's one intermediate step in between the findings and then the questions you ask, which is we build hypotheses. So we go, these are potential explanations of what may have caused this incident, where they have a narrative chain. And those narratives are building the narrative based on the findings that we've got and established previously. The questions that we then generate are designed to grill and refine those hypotheses. So we're actually grading and critiquing the hypothesis and the narrative that we've gone and built, where we're like, that thing looks pretty shaky actually, or I could probably do with double checking this thing. And then eventually when those questions are answered, we come back in and we go, actually, discounting that finding, what do I do now? What is my new version of this world? And that's when we do another turn and go, actually, we're tweaking the hypothesis or the narrative.
So your orchestrator, I'm going to use some nerdy terms, but I'm going to fully geek out on this. You're basically implementing your orchestrator to manage this inductive, deductive process.
Yes.
We found a bunch of findings. What's our inductive theory of what could be going wrong? Okay, now how are we going to test that inductive theory? Here's some questions, go test it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's exactly as you would as a human. But then the useful thing for us, and like this has been the challenge with all of this stuff, because you can get an agent to go and run and do this stuff, but the agent doesn't have any format of how it's structuring its thinking. It just has some freeform stuff. And that's not good enough for us. What we need to do is we need to be structuring it into, here are findings, and here is a hypothesis, and here's our confidence, so that we can present that back in a dashboard view so that people can actually work their way through all of the working that we've got. And so that they can click on a thing and go, actually, that's wrong. And then because the UI is glued into the structure, that can then form its way back into the hypothesis that will generate.
Yeah, this is also a theme around how to structure data to be useful. And so it sounds like you're already starting to uncover, we have findings, we have hypotheses, we have open questions. And I can see how an agent with sub-agents could churn through all of that. I imagine one of the hardest design problems is, what are you exposing in Slack? How much to expose in Slack? Tell me a little bit about what does that look like?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's a work in progress to some extent. We always
Yeah.
have this constant trade-off in Slack, which is we don't want to produce too much noise. Already, these are noisy spaces. People are bringing alerts or links out to other systems and they're chatting themselves. So we always are trying to reduce the content we have in terms of noise. But then the feedback we get is, hey, actually, it would have been useful if you had said this piece of information too, or this bit of information. So
Yeah.
we're always torn in two directions. And we've landed on this solution at the moment where we have a very compact report that will be in the channel itself. And then we'll use the thread and this additional dashboard interface we have to provide more detail. So the behavior we see usually is people will scan the report and then they'll have an immediate intuition about, hey, this is actually where I want to take the conversation next, or this is the interesting aspect of it. And they'll either ask that as a question in Slack, in which case then we'll add more content once we're asked to, or they'll link out to the other system and then they can click into the citations and things like that.
It's almost like the humans on your team are also like sub-agents working on the problem.
And I think increasingly it will become this. Like, it sounds really silly, but we have a task management system in incidents because you want to be able to go, oh, like you're going to go do this, you're going to go do that. But I think it's a really interesting concept to imagine that you can allocate a task to an agent. So just like you would assign, go check this dashboard actually and let me know when something's gone wrong to a human, nowadays there are probably candidate items in your task list that can just entirely be automated. And you don't need to have a person going and thinking about, I'm refreshing someone's status page every minute. It's now, no, we'll come back and tell you when that's actually changed.
Yeah. And one thing that's really exciting there is this idea of a repeat task as well. So like that example you just said, which is actually, ideally, we'd be looking at this status page every single minute or be checking this metric every 5 minutes. And a human, you might not ask to do that because it takes loads of time and there's lots of other options for them to do. But you can assign agents to do those tasks and then they can report back only if something has changed.
Yeah.
So I think like one key use case for me is like having the page for, like you said, some things where it's a third-party provider and there's nothing reasonable that you can do about things, but you want to be able to inform people when something changes.
Yeah.
Being able to go, hey, by the way, can you check on the status page and tell me when it changes, but pause this incident for now and just page my phone when something happens. Like that idea of a callback task so that I can go back and eat my dinner.
Yeah.
And like, I know when something changes and I'll be right on it. That's really painful in a normal incident without all these tools.
I love how, like, I'm not an expert on AI products by any means. I'm geeking out on them. I'm interviewing a lot of teams. I've built one little AI product. Like, but it's so fun to learn how I feel like I can imagine your process diagram for your product. No step seems that complicated. I realize there's complexity here. I'm not trying to trivialize it, but I love seeing how complexity emerges. Like your orchestrator agent is actually doing a pretty compelling investigation. And the way that like we decompose that into these component parts to get pretty complex behavior is really remarkable. And this is like something I see across all of our episodes, which is why I'm having just so much fun doing this, is like just seeing how we can orchestrate pretty complex behavior with what at its root level is a pretty simple technology, a very magical technology, but a pretty simple technology.
Yeah,
okay.
And it's amazing how complexity emerges in these systems over time, because you can start out with a fairly simple architecture, and then you start breaking the problems down more and more into more prompts, into more tools, combining them with other techniques like embeddings or keyword search. And then in the end, you can have these, if you draw an architecture diagram, you might have hundreds of prompts mixed in with other technologies and some bits are looping, and suddenly kind of emerges this beast.
It's also fun seeing what the models like decide or the system decides to do where it catches you off guard. Like I always like a moment where you're like, oh, wow, it did that. Does make so much sense. And I didn't even think about it. So we had an incident ourselves the other day where there was a network issue communicating with an external provider, and our investigation system set off and it did all the right things. It like checked the dashboard for all of our external integrations and it went, well, this specific provider looks like we're getting high error rate. But then it's one of the questions that I now have is it just this provider? Or is it other providers? So I negated it. And then I looked at the dashboard again and it confirmed that it was probably only this one, but there's a couple of flakiness elsewhere. And then it went, yeah, but it could just be like, it could be that the other ones that were flaky or the ones that were reporting no error rate, maybe we weren't using them. So it could actually be like a full network issue. So then what it did was it loaded up our Kubernetes dashboards to go, actually find our infrastructure and how's the network connectivity? Can I see anything in the bandwidth going out from these pods? Is anything like having issues? And I'm an SRE at Trade or at Heart, and I've dealt with incidents like this before, but I would never, because in my prioritization list, that's not the most obvious cause, I would never find time to go and do that.
Yeah.
But this is much more thorough, and it's gone and actually really tried ruling this stuff out in a way that I wouldn't have naturally done just because I was time constrained. And that was like, this thing's really smart. That's fun.
Yeah, I feel like every story has these surprises, like, oh, that maybe looks wrong. Oh no, it turns out it was right, and that's amazing.
Yep.
Okay, with this kind of overall architecture picture, let's get a little bit into evals. How are you? I can see two. I always ask everybody just the broad question of like, how do you know this is any good? But I think in your case, I also have a more specific question of, it seems like the hard part in your system is making sure that you're not surfacing irrelevant stuff. And so I'm really curious to dig into what are the guardrails or evaluations you're putting in place to make sure that's the case.
I've spoken about this a bit before, and I think whenever you're trying to come up with a way of, so that there's evals, right? And evals are, if you have a prompt, like it's just a single prompt and it's like a function. You want to put stuff in, confirm that what you get out for all of your different test cases looks okay. But most of the important AI interactions are a combination of prompts now, often hundreds actually in the really complex systems. And your decision on what is right is often very difficult to kind of come up with. The good thing is that I think, and in most evaluation systems that operate on production AI systems, I think you want to be looking for opportunities to what I call like time travel. So for us, what that means is we may not know at the moment that an incident is created what the incident causes. But if we choose to evaluate our investigation after the incident is closed, potentially after someone's written a postmortem, now because of all the information that people have fed into the system and we watched how the incident progressed, we actually have a really good idea of what happened and we know exactly what the cause was. So what we end up doing is when every incident closes, we give it maybe a couple of hours and then we pre-process everything from the incident to go, these were the things that actually went wrong and here's everything that you did to try to fix it. And then when we have all of that stuff presented and structured, we then run a ton of graders and we produce a scorecard on our investigation that goes everything that you claimed and everything that you thought was going on, what was right, what was wrong, what was really relevant according to how we saw the incident responders use it. And that ability to grade it with all of the information that you have only after the incident has closed allows us to, even without us having humans generating this like ground truth data, we can do a really good job of evaluating the system just like at arm's length using AI to do it all for us.
Okay, I love this. I love that you have a clear, like, at the end of an incident, you know exactly what the cause of the incident was. You can look back and say, did the AI surface relevant things? Here's my question though, like if you were a human doing this process, there's not like a straight line to this was the cause of the incident. There's some wandering and there's probably smart wandering and then there's probably pretty dumb wandering. So it seems like your evals have to be a little more nuanced than did it just get you to the right end.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think we've got Tom and Millie on the team who are working on much more sophisticated metrics for this at the moment. And they're coming up with funny phrases like the confusion matrix, which is what they're talking about in terms of false positives, true positives, false negatives, true negatives. But you're absolutely right. There is value in so many places that you can provide here. It is not necessarily the case that looking at a dashboard and confirming that something isn't true that ends up not being relevant to the incident is actually not providing value. You presenting that information up front to responders is actually very valuable. What is more valuable is if you can say, it's actually this, by the way, and you're right. but there's value all along the way. And I think that's what we're trying really hard to try and capture in the metrics that we're seeing. Ideally, we want to be providing value at all the different levels, from having like extremely accurate root causing, but also all the way along the chain, did we find things that appear to be relevant to the responders according to who clicked into this, who looked at this, also collecting feedback from people on what was the most useful thing here. And I think this is another very kind of interesting thing that we're going to look into, which is using AI to guide the feedback questions that we're asking from people.
Yeah, we always have a trade-off collecting user feedback, exactly, because as you're saying, it's quite complicated how we're providing value and at which point during the incident. But equally, when we're asking for feedback, we want to make it as easy as possible. So we end up in a situation where we just want someone to tell us, was this useful? Yes or no? But exactly what was it? Was it the initial report? Was it some question later? I think it's honestly something we haven't got exactly right yet. So we're considering lots of options, things like using another agent to look at the incident and generate questions. Where could we learn from? Or which bits of the incident are we not sure on? And then asking those specific sections, hey, was this valuable? But another thing we're trying to do is have the user feedback and then the feedback which we're generating, or the scorecards we're generating automatically, and then seeing if we can correlate the two, and then over time make sure our automated scoring mechanisms are aligned with what users are saying are useful as well.
How are you collecting the user feedback? At what point?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. So for us, because an incident is such essentially an urgent moment, they don't want any distractions, they need to focus. It means if you go and send them a message and say, is this useful? During that moment, one, they're not going to reply to you, but also you might piss them off as well. So what we do is we'll look at the people in the incident who are the most active in resolving it. And then once the incident is over, then we'll send them a message. And again, we'll use Slack to do that because that's where so much of the surface of our product is. Our app will send them a message afterwards and with a snippet of what we've sent them and say, was this output useful for you? Yes or no? And then they can optionally provide kind of additional comments as well.
We also have, so a lot of the, as you're working through the incident, you can just chat to us and go, hey, actually, like I've just found this thing. Can you go check that dashboard and let me know what's going on? Or, hey, can you update the incident and do that? At any point, you can also go, hey, at incident, actually, that kind of sucks. and that will collect it as feedback for us. And we'll go, really sorry about that. And that ends up finding its way into our user feedback too. So all of that stuff is recorded and goes straight to the team.
Yeah, I imagine there's the, this is terrible kind of comments that are,
oh,
this was super helpful, thanks. I can imagine, like from an eval standpoint, this idea of there's never a straight line to the cause of the incident. And like, how do you define useful wandering versus the agent is struggling wandering? Maybe like a way, like, do you guys think about it as like you're narrowing the search space in the right way versus maybe like expanding the search space towards a red herring? Like I could imagine you could look back and say, this may have been wrong, but it still got us on the path to the right direction versus this was wrong and just led us astray. And then I think even in that it's wrong and it led us astray, what got me thinking about this was this idea that it's probably helpful to know it wasn't this. If the agent can be like, this is not the cause, that's like clearly narrowing the search space. But I think what is probably the hardest, and tell me if this is true, is like the agent suggests something, which is totally plausible. It could have been that thing, but in this incident, it didn't happen to be that thing.
Yeah. So I think this, honestly, this happens all the time, right? Especially as we're working through our report and we're evolving our understanding of the incident. So I think what we're doing at the moment and our focus at the moment is on the final claim that we make. Honestly, that's where we put most of our evaluation effort. I think what's going to become more interesting, especially as we work more into or lean more heavily into the ambient aspect of the agent. I think you can start an incident and you have an understanding of what you think it might be. And then even 5 minutes later, you think it's something totally different. And I think us being able to mark the points along an incident timeline where both how soon did we manage to detect that the thing is totally different versus what we had before, and how confident were we with the previous claim that we had, and like how like doing an analysis over time throughout the incident on how our understanding evolved and how much it lagged behind human responders, or in some cases was ahead, is something that we're really interested in doing as we lean more into kind of proactively telling people, hey, I've changed my mind, actually, it's probably not that thing because I found this other thing, or you quoted that thing there, and here is what I now think it is.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important for us here as well is that human responders might have quite different intuition to what an AI system can find because they are working fundamentally in different ways. But that means if our system, AI SRE, has, say, 3 hypotheses, a human responder might immediately be able to say, no, it's probably not that one. But these 2 look plausible, but I have these 2 questions about it. So the fact it's very much a human in the loop system, and the fact that people can chat back to us or they can just chat in the channel to other people working on it, I think that really helps us narrow down the search space.
I think what's really fascinating about this is the agent isn't just surfacing information to the human. The agent is also trying to find the cause of the incident. But there's also this collaborative piece. There is a human in the loop. The human is contributing findings, questioning hypotheses, ruling them out, which is just such a cool collaboration case.
And I like it absolutely is. The funny thing, and I used to joke with Ed back when we first started this about how he was gradually turning into a machine, talking about effort as tokens and things like that. But now it's happened to me because when you say that, I go, actually, there's very little that is different between us running all these agents concurrently and trying to get them to communicate and pass context between one another, and actually modeling just the incident channel as just a collection of humans that are just another agent that's
Yeah.
passing data back and forward, and how like the patterns around how we notify other agents is very interesting to think of. If our code agent is off and it's going to take about 2 minutes to complete its current task, how do you pick the right moment to go and tell it about a new thing? And it's the
Yeah.
same thing with incidents or responders in the channel. You want to pick and choose your right moment to go tell them. You probably don't want to jump in the middle of a conversation. So we have heuristics around like when do we notify people based on how active the channel is, because we don't want to cut in if someone's talking about it. But that, yeah, sadly, I now see them as one and the same. And that helps us in some ways.
I'm not sure. This might just be our future.
It may well be.
I imagine you probably have to look at things like the urgency of that new finding or the urgency of that message of this is urgent enough, I should interrupt. Oh, that's so fascinating. Okay, so it sounds like from an eval standpoint, you're really focused on this like post-incident look back, which is amazing. But I imagine you must have some kind of guardrails in the process itself as well. Is there anything that's happening real time?
Yeah, no, like again, the kind of model of us critiquing everything that we're producing and having other agents try and grill the hypothesis, we will dial down what we're claiming based on the level of confidence and uncertainty that we have.
Okay.
And this stuff it's so important for a system like this that it's just, you can't build one without it, because in order for you to even test a hypothesis, you must first start with a level of uncertainty that is quite high. And it's only as you start ratcheting up through the questions you're asking and getting more information that you can go with confidence, it's actually this thing here. But I think, I don't know whether or not it's interesting for anyone listening, but we have evals or scoring for very different purposes. So I think much in the way that you have unit and integration and end-to-end tests, the way that we score our investigations, we have our signal and noise ratio, which is the final result that we're exposing to people and the claims that we've made. How good was the RCA? And that's really useful for telling you what the end result is with people. But if that is then bad and something's gone wrong, you as a person who's debugging the investigation, you need to know which part of it went wrong. And what we've done is actually we've taken this investigation system and architecturally we've broken it down into different units. And we have different graders that we run on the different units of the investigation. So, for example, if we're trying to figure out why did we not find a GitHub pull request that actually caused this incident, like what went wrong in the RAG searching, we have a grader that works on just the cause and code change search that can tell us precision and recall, and it can help us debug what went wrong, like whether the tag's incorrect, was this just like a really old PR, like what actually happened there. And I think those things are used in very different ways. We end up with our signal and noise for telling us what the customer understanding of things were. We then have these graders on the different subsections of the investigation to help us narrow down on which system went wrong. And then we have our evals, which are our unit tests on the prompts internally in the code base, which help us when we go, a prompt is wrong. Now, actually, we're going to take this production thing, put it in the eval suite, and try and figure out how to make the prompt work better.
It sounds like at the prompt level, based on what you just said, a lot of that is data set driven. Is that fair?
It can be. I think as you widen the data set of people you like passing data through the system, you start to realize that either your prompt has embedded some of your context as a human that may or may not be relevant to the situation of the customer. Like there's stuff that you can write without ever realizing into a prompt that is very specific to your lived experience, if that makes any sense. Like we know how we run things at incident. And as a result, I think at one point we were trying to debug an eval that was going wrong. And I was having a chat with Minnie at the time, and she was like, no, but obviously it's not this. And it was suggesting, I think at the time, that it might be a feature flagging thing because of a code change that we saw. And I was like, actually, if you think about it, like you only know it's not that because it wouldn't be for our context. It's very reasonable for the LLM to think that it was. And what we ended up doing is, as we were adjusting the prompt, we were overfitting to our situation, which was going to make us much worse on our customer base. So you have to be really careful when you're like leaking your baggage into the prompt.
I love that you're bringing this up, because this is actually the first time I've heard somebody bring this up. And I feel, so my background is in product discovery. And I feel like one of the hardest things for product teams is like we develop expertise about our product and like we understand our product's mental model through and through. And like part of the reason why our products stop working for our customers is because they're no longer aligned with our customers' mental model. And this is exactly that, right? Like your mental model of your product is starting to leak into the prompt. And if that doesn't match your customer's mental model, you're going to get yourself into trouble.
Yeah, I think Another interesting place that you see this is as soon as you introduce chat interactions, people have no idea what the system can do. They'll
Yeah.
ask all sorts of questions, and it's actually a huge challenge for them to build up a model of, okay, here are the tools that are available to me in this context. Maybe it's different in other contexts. That's a problem that we've been working hard to solve as well.
And the foundation labs don't really help because you can ask a foundation lab model anything and everything under the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we are coming up on time. Let me ask, it sounds like this is a product in development still. What's the life cycle? Where are you in the life cycle of this product? Do you have it live with customers? Are you dog fooding it?
We're live with quite a few of our customers and we're seeing success. So what's next for us really is making the system smarter by supporting more in the way of integrations. There's this huge long tail of different sources of information that the system could in theory consider. So over time, it's about supporting more and more of that, supporting more observability platforms, but also other things too, like deploys and flags and other changes, other sources of relevant context. So we'll be investing there to make the system smarter. And then the other direction we want to push in is doing more to actually help you resolve the incident. So once we've figured out what's going on, then next you need to actually go ahead and mitigate it. We've taken steps in that direction already. So now we can generate code changes for you if it's the case that it can be fixed by a code change. And we can make other recommendations, things like, hey, maybe you should communicate it in this way because in previous incidents you've gone and updated your status page. But there's definitely more we can do there too. There's lots of other mitigations that people do to resolve incidents that we could start to support more with as well.
Yeah, amazing. So one of the themes, especially with B2B products, is this idea of integrations. Like your agent needs data from across the organization. This almost feels like an infinite problem of if you look across your customer base, like there's so many permutations of tools they could be using. Tell me a little bit about how you're tackling that. How are you deciding who to integrate with? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of coming from the place that we're at, I've always described ourselves as, I think when you're an incident response product, the intent is that you're there for the whole of the organization whenever anything goes wrong. So we've always had this kind of funnel where eventually by the time someone's installed you and started using you for incident response, the center of gravity is for you to hook almost all of your tooling into us. So we arrived at trying to build these AI systems with already a huge established connection pool to almost any integration, right? We got all your issue trackers. We even have a connection to your HR tools so that we can find holiday clashes with your paging provider. There's tons of stuff that we already have access to. And for us, it's been a case of trying to structure that data and allow the AI to make best use of it. I think like when it comes to what integrations we pick so that we can start providing first class support for them, that's driven mostly by our customers and their need and the pull that we get from them, along with who we're working with really closely in the early stages. So you need this kind of constant communication with your customers to go, this is going well, how can we tweak this? Can you give us some of your time to tell us what we were missing from your organizational context? And that's usually what drives it.
I also imagine as you get into your debriefs, you can start to look at, do we even have the data that would help us find the cause?
Oh, absolutely. And that is part of the scoring that we're doing at the moment. One of the things that we're doing when we're grading these individual investigations is we're looking around and going, what happened inside of the incident in a tool that we don't have access to? And that can be because we don't have an integration for it, but it can also be because the customer just hasn't connected it, or maybe we don't have access to that specific resource in that account. And for that, we want to be surfacing this to our customers and going, actually, had you given us access, then we would have been able to do a much better job of this investigation.
Yeah, awesome. This has been amazing. I want to thank both of you for taking the time to share this with me. I really do love these stories. It sounds like you're building a remarkable product, and I'm excited for probably the hours and hours of angst you're saving people in pretty urgent moments. So nice work.
No, thank you very much for having us on.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been awesome.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe in your favorite podcast app and give us a rating as it helps others find the show. Thanks, I appreciate it.